It's mid-size stroller review week here at the Stroller Workshop, and today we're going to be comparing two of the most iconic mid-size strollers of all time, the Bugaboo Cameleon and the Stokke Xplory. Why are they iconic? Well, they both had product placement in Sex and the City, right? Even if the Xplory was a little late to the game and only got in the movie version. I guess going off our title, that makes the Cameleon Derek Zoolander and the Xplory Hansel, even though they were both originally released around the same time, way back in the Carey days of the early 2000s. So why would you want one of these versus the other then? I mean, other than their shapes being burned into the retina of your subconscious through years of product placement. Well, my first guess is that you're fashion conscious, yet at the same time, either conservative or old school enough not to get fooled into buying a $3,000 limited edition Cybex preamp. Those guys own no shame, am I right? But how do the Cameleon and Xplory actually function though? I mean, that question has to come up somewhere. Well, today we're going to tell you exactly that. And luckily we have many, many years of experience with both of these strollers from which to judge their differences. Let's start with a few stats. The Cameleon clocks in at 9.6 kilos versus the Xplory's 12. That's right, don't get fooled by that single central arm on the Xplory. It's one solid piece of metal. And the Cameleon folds down smaller as well, at 90 by 50 by 31 centimeters versus 99 by 56 by 34 on the Xplory. Both of these strollers have roughly identical weight capacities in the seat, but the Xplory claims 9 kilos in the shopping basket versus the Cameleon's 4. Only make sure you understand that the Xplory doesn't exactly have a shopping basket, at least not in the traditional sense. Instead, it has a stylish, forward-mounted and removable picnic sack. The Cameleon 3 has a picnic sack as well, by the way. It's just not easily removable, or accessible for that matter. So if you go Cameleon, make sure you get the 3 Plus shopping basket, so using the basket will actually be a comfortable experience. Okay, comfort in use. Well, first off, both of these strollers are mid-size, so not particularly great off-road. The Cameleon sports bigger back wheels, but smaller front wheels than the Xplory, and has better suspension. The Xplory, by contrast, is significantly more robust in its engineering, but has virtually no suspension whatsoever. What this means is that, despite the option for terrain wheels on the Cameleon, a bad idea, watch our review on the Cameleon 3 if you are curious why, neither of these strollers will function well off of smooth streets or light terrain, aka manicured lawns and smooth dirt roads. That isn't in itself a problem, it just depends on where you live. I was born and raised in the car culture of San Diego, California, and both of these strollers would function just fine there, as long as you don't want to take them for a hike. I now live in Norway, with forest paths and lots of snow in the winter, where I wouldn't be caught dead with either of these strollers. So just know where you live. Both of these strollers fold in 2 pieces, but beyond this, folding definitely goes to the Cameleon. The system for folding and unfolding with the Cameleon is just way easier and more comfortable. The Xplory, as sort of a UFO, has this full-on cockpit control array up here, with lots of height and position adjustment triggers. And whenever you fold or unfold the stroller, they get to make you use them. Ease of textile removal and overall maintenance, meaning mainly lubrication, also go to the Cameleon. But when it comes to the seat itself and your child's comfort, I definitely go with the Xplory, based on that most obvious of differences, seat height. The Xplory seat sits way higher than the Cameleon, and this is a nice thing. I can attest from 2 children that it really does make a difference, especially in that crucial toddler early stroller phase, like 1 to 2.5 or 3 years. Kids love to sit up higher and get a bit more overview of their world. And besides, it has a built-in punishment function as well. If they annoy you, you can just... Nah, I'm just kidding, of course. Okay, let's look at the mechanics then, top to bottom. Okay, starting with the handles then. The Cameleon has a contiguous telescopic handle, and it has a lot of the mechanisms that you'll need in the daily use of the stroller located up at the top. The Xplory does too, actually. One difference between the mechanisms you'll find on the Cameleon at the level of the handle and those on the Xplory is the static brake, which is operated up here, where it's easy to get a hold of. The Xplory, by contrast, has a smaller steering wheel type handle, and a lot of the internal complexity of the Xplory actually occurs up at the level of the handle in this central compartment here, where both the mechanisms for handle position regulation and the height of the shaft are located. Now, one of the things about having the handle attached then to the central shaft is that a lot of pressure is put on the handle when you turn left and right, which can sometimes lead to symmetry issues within the mechanisms inside the central compartment, making it a little bit more difficult to operate those mechanisms. For the handles, I would give a slight edge to the Cameleon, due primarily to the mechanisms being smoother to operate generally, and the handle itself as independent from the rest of the stroller, tending to undergo less stress and thus generally having a lower chance of developing problems in the long run. Okay, let's move down to the central locking mechanism. Though on the Xplory, we're really going to be talking more about the central shaft as a whole, rather than the central locking mechanism itself. On the Cameleon, the central locking mechanism is the great Shakespearean tragedy of the model. It is this way because the Cameleon wants to have a reversible handle as such, and this creates a way of designing the central locking mechanism that has proven to be a lot weaker than a lot of their other models. What I've found over successive generations of the Cameleon is that the central locking mechanism is actually getting worse as opposed to better, unfortunately. They're all designed a bit the same with slight differences in the size and the orientation of parts between all three generations of the Cameleon, but where one or two parts broke on the Cameleon 1, you add an extra part with the Cameleon 2 and with the Cameleon 3, when that same sort of breakage occurs that has occurred the whole time, we're now really talking about quite a few parts inside and the housing around being damaged anytime you have problems there. With the Xplory, the actual central locking mechanism is so simple by comparison that it really doesn't deserve its own section. It's just a quick and easy sort of release mechanism for the rear frame so that it can slide in towards the front frame. The central shaft, on the other hand, is sort of worth discussing, and there are advantages and disadvantages having a design of a central shaft as opposed, again, to that more conventional use of two arms along the side. On an advantage point of view, when you have a stroller like a Cameleon, or really like most strollers, where you have two arms on the side, when a weak point occurs at one of the connection points or mechanisms on one side, it can lead to symmetry issues on the other side, and thus sort of mess up and loosen the whole stroller as a whole. But when you have the central shaft design that you have on the Xplory, you have the opposite problem, which is a lack of symmetrical support. This means that all of the points at which the seat attaches, the handle attaches, the rear frame, front frame, and so on attached to the central shaft, they're all going to have a bit more stress put on them through the daily use of just moving through the world with weight on your stroller and turning left and right. Over time, we notice that this is mostly an issue as the central shaft connects to the rear frame and to the handle, as these are the points that are most affected by looseness. Okay, we're going to look at the lower rear frame now of both of these models. In general, I actually like the Cameleon's rear frame a lot better than the Xplory. I find the rear frame to be one of the key weak points on the Xplory model itself. Part of this is that even though both of these models lack a dedicated suspension unit, a lot of suspension does actually occur in the central locking mechanism on the Cameleon, even though this wears down the central locking mechanism. So it has less need for one, even though with both these strollers, again, you'd only be going in urban environments ideally. In addition to this, the rear wheels are larger. They're these foam-filled tires. It has a certain amount of added suspension, and I also like the way that they connect to the stroller a bit better. Within the rear wheel housing on the Xplory, you have a lot of parts that are all screwed together, and these can loosen over time. In addition, you need to clean out any sort of gunk and stuff that gets into that rear housing mechanism. On the Xplory, it's more of an issue than it is with the Cameleon. Otherwise, you can develop issues with the brakes and with the wheels getting loose. Brake system in general, on the Cameleon, again, you have that static brake that is handle mounted, which generally is not something that I like on strollers because I feel it kind of adds complexity. But the Cameleon has always kind of made it work, and in the Cameleon 3, it really isn't its best iteration. On the Xplory, the brake system runs a brake wire through this central shaft, and overall it's a little bit of a weak system, and the primary reason for that, again, has to do with simply too many parts in the housing, and especially with the brake on this side, that can all loosen over time and do need a certain amount of regular cleaning and oiling to keep functioning properly. Okay, looking at the front frame, we're primarily going to be looking at the wheels, of course. Overall, on the front frames, I like the Xplory better. It has larger front wheels, which does give it a little bit more drivability, even though it has a lack of suspension. In addition to this, the front wheels on the Xplory are not removable, and what this means for the model is that the fork can attach a lot tighter into the front frame, and thus it doesn't get loose and rattle around. And the way that the front wheels are connected to the front frame is a lot tighter than it is with a removable system like you have on the Cameleon. The Cameleon wheels do have a little bit of suspension in the front end, but I've never really felt that has impacted drivability significantly on the model. And if you're rolling both of these strollers next to each other, you will notice that the Cameleon 3 sounds a lot rattlier in the front end than the Xplory. One thing I do like the Cameleon 4 more on the front end is the swivel lock. It has this large button that pops up in the back, and it fits a lot tighter and tends to have fewer problems than the one on the Xplory. Not that the one on the Xplory is a particularly bad system, but it is not very tight, and sometimes it does slip off. Both of these strollers can develop ball bearing issues in the front, especially since you have a smaller front wheel and not a lot of terrain capability, which means that those wheels, they spin fast, and if you go over terrain that you're not supposed to go over and you don't oil and maintain your wheels properly, over time you will eventually develop problems with the ball bearings, or might develop problems with the ball bearings as the wheel meets the fork. But that's true of most strollers. So which of these two is right for you? Despite vastly different mechanics, both of these strollers essentially service the same lifestyle, most ideally fitting urban conditions and working quite well if you use a car daily. The Cameleon is a tad lighter and smaller, but the Xplory is a good deal sturdier. Both of these strollers are the academic equivalent of that old codger professor, too set in his ways, religiously holding on to design principles established nearly 2 decades ago. That's what it means to be a company's flagship. Really though, I'm not sure any of this matters, because if you already want one of these two, you probably know which one. Just make sure you understand the reasons behind your choices, and make sure it's not Sex and the City or some other sublimated response to fashion and Hollywood culture. In my opinion, you're actually better off choosing neither of them. What's that? But you still want a Bugaboo or a Stokke? Good. Very good. These are, in actuality, both amazing, awesome brands, both for mechanics and comfort of use. In fact, they're not just awesome brands, they're the best brands in my opinion, for 4-wheel, front swivel wheel, reversible seat, full-size strollers. Just not these two iconic models. For my money, I'd go get a Fox or a Trails and let these two do their primping and posing at someone else's expense. In any case, we hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, we ask that you subscribe, as it helps us to continue making videos in the future. Thank you.